William Harland, now an old man, carries a memory too sharp to dull with time. A battlefield decision that took 5 seconds, but has haunted him for 80 years. The bullet didn't sound like he thought it would. It had a whisper to it, not a bang, not even a crack. More like the hiss of something slicing through air with purpose. William Harland had only a second to register the sound before the boy behind him slumped forward, lifeless, his body folding into the bottom of the boat, like he'd fallen asleep sitting up. No scream, no flinch. Just gone. It was February 1945, somewhere along the freezing banks of the Rhine River. The moon hung over the water like a pale wound in the sky, offering just enough light to make them feel exposed. 8 soldiers packed into a wooden boat barely wide enough to hold them. They moved quietly, paddling into a wide stretch of river about 250 yards across, but it felt like a lifetime. Their destination was the far side, cloaked in fog and shadows and occupied by snipers who knew how to kill without being seen. William was the #1 man in the boat, the front, the first face the bullets would see. Behind him was his assistant, then the third man, then 5 others. Minutes before they pushed off, the captain jogged down to the riverbank. "Willie said I want a radio in your boat. I need one of your men," just like that. No explanation, just another order in a war built from orders. William turned, looked down the line of his men, and pointed to his number 3. The kid, quiet, sharp, maybe 19, nodded and stepped out. Didn't even speak. The captain replaced him with someone from another squad, a fresh face William had never seen before. Then the captain clapped his shoulder, told them to move, and disappeared back into the dark. 15 seconds later, the sniper's bullet tore through William's jacket, nicked the side of his ribs, hot and sharp like a red-hot wire, and then slammed straight into the new kid's heart. It was over before it began. The boat rocked from the impact, but no one screamed. The paddling slowed. William didn't look back. He couldn't. He just kept paddling, hands trembling around the shaft of the oar, blood trickling beneath his uniform. In that moment, all he could think was, that bullet had my name on it. There's a cruelty to war that isn't taught in training, not the kind in the textbooks or the newsreels. It's not about flags or causes or noble speeches. It's about randomness, the kind that can switch lives in a breath. William had given up that seat. If he hadn't, he would be dead, and some boy whose name he didn't even know would still be breathing. "I gave him that seat," he would later say, not to anyone in particular, just into the quiet of his kitchen at 2 a.m. Decades later. It should have been me. The days that followed were a blur of white frost, black smoke, and red snow. Their crossing was just one part of a bigger push toward the heart of Germany. Each morning was colder than the last, around 18 degrees before sunrise. William's coat barely kept the frost off. He wrapped rags around his boots to keep his toes from turning purple. They slept in ditches or not at all. Sleep was dangerous. Sleep could mean you didn't wake up. But even in that chaos, the image of that boy, the stranger he'd traded for, stayed lodged in William's chest. He didn't know his name, but he remembered how his helmet had tilted slightly when he slumped. He remembered how clean the shot was. 1 second alive, the next? Nothing. No explosion, no screaming. Just a quiet subtraction from the world. When they reached the far bank of the river, there was no time to grieve. They moved quickly, clearing houses, ducking sniper fire, stepping over bodies, some German, some not. William's wound was minor, just a line of raw skin and a burned edge of cloth. Medics patched him up with gauze and cold hands, then sent him forward. Forward was always the direction in war. Never back, never stop, just forward. Years later, William would try to explain it to his daughter once. They were sitting on the porch in Wisconsin, a few miles outside Janesville. It was early fall. The leaves had just started to yellow. She had asked what haunted him the most. He didn't talk about tanks or frozen foxholes or the shriek of German 88s. He didn't mention the day he saw an entire town turned to rubble by coordinated shelling. He didn't even talk about Hill 360, where 4 of his closest friends, Ray Collins, Lopez, and Tiny, had all died in the span of 4 hours. No, what he told her about was the boat, the seat, the 5 seconds it took to point to that kid and send him to die. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to say something, maybe you didn't know, or it wasn't your fault, but he shook his head. "Don't," he said softly. "Just let me carry it." He kept the jacket, folded it carefully, and stored it in a wooden box beneath his bed. Every time he moved two-bedroom starter home, then farmhouse, then assisted living apartment, the box came too. He never showed it to anyone, but every year on February 23rd, he would open it, press his hand against the bullet hole, and sit in silence for a while. It wasn't just the memory of that boy, it was the unbearable weight of surviving, and it stayed with him like a shadow stitched into his skin. The river had been still that night, too still like it knew what was coming. William sometimes dreamed of it. The boat, the moonlight, the hush before the shot. In those dreams, the bullet doesn't miss. It finishes what it started. And he wakes with the same question echoing in his bones. Why him? Why not me? The story begins with a single choice made in the dark, one that haunts a man more than any wound ever could. As the streetlights began to flicker back to life in his memory, William's journey was far from over. The world might have forgotten what he carried, but he hadn't, not even close. William Harland still carries the moment that defined his life, the 5-second choice that sent another soldier to die in his place. But while that memory never leaves him, the world around him has already moved on. The jacket still hung there, same bullet hole, same ragged stitching, where a medic once wrapped him up and said, "You'll live." William Harland had lived all right. 80 years and counting, and in all that time no one had asked about the jacket. Not once. It hung from a bent nail in the corner of his garage next to a rusted tackle box and an old coffee tin full of bent screws. Visitors never noticed it. Neighbors who borrowed his ladder or stopped by with pie never looked twice. His own grandchildren didn't ask. Maybe they assumed it was just another relic from a long life. Maybe they didn't care to ask. William wasn't sure which one hurt more. These days, his house in Monroe, Wisconsin sat quiet. 2 bedrooms, 1 floor, linoleum floors that creaked underfoot, and a wall calendar that still showed September, even though the cold had already crept in. He lived alone now. His wife Claire had passed 5 winters earlier, and the silence since then had grown thick, not just in the air, but in his chest. What filled the silence was memory. They came sharpest around dusk. That soft amber light would slip through the living room blinds and throw long shadows across the rug. It was always then, without fail, that his mind would drift to Hill 360. To the river crossing, to the eyes of the kid behind him in the boat, still open, still watching. But out there in the world beyond his blinds, people had stopped looking back. Once during a trip to the grocery store, William stood in line behind 2 young men, maybe early 20s, scrolling through their phones and laughing too loudly. One of them turned his screen around and said, "Dude, look at this. This vet's having a meltdown because of a balloon popping. PTSD or something. Hilarious." The video played volume up. A man in a diner flinched hard at the sound of a birthday balloon bursting, spilling his coffee. The laughter from the booth had been immediate. The comments worse. Boomer Breakdown was the top hashtag. William said nothing. He just stared at the loaf of rye bread in his hands and quietly stepped out of line. That night he skipped dinner. He didn't blame them. Not really, not at first. He knew the world changed. Time moved forward. People forgot. But then in early March, a veterans memorial downtown was defaced. Spray paint neon green read, "War isn't heroism, it's colonization." He read about it in the local paper. No one caught. No one apologized. The city quietly cleaned the stone and moved on. But William didn't. That night he drove to the memorial just after sunset, walked up to the clean monument and ran his hand over the granite names. Ray, Collins, Lopez, Tiny McKee. His fingers paused on each one. No one else was there. No flags, no candles. Just silence and streetlight. He wanted to yell, to explain, to make someone understand that those boys didn't die for conquest or slogans. They died because they were told to go, and because they loved the guy next to them more than they feared the machine gun across the tree line. But there was no one to tell. Even online, where the past supposedly lives forever, William's story didn't exist. He once tried to upload a photo of his unit, 8 men, muddy and grinning, in front of a Sherman tank to a history forum. The post got 3 likes, no comments. Below it, a meme about how real men used to fight wars had 8,000 shares and a gif of a cartoon soldier flexing. He shut his laptop and didn't touch it again for 3 weeks. What people wanted weren't stories, they wanted punchlines. Nostalgia maybe. Aesthetics. Not memory, not pain. Certainly not the truth, but the truth still lived in William, and in that bullet-torn jacket. He began writing a letter to the family of the boy who died in the boat. Didn't even know his name, just number 3. He had thought maybe the captain had records. Maybe somewhere some sister or niece was still alive wondering how her brother had passed. He wrote, "Your boy died in silence." He didn't scream. He didn't suffer. It was quick, and I wish to God it had been me instead. He stared at the letter for days, folded it, unfolded it, then finally dropped it in the fireplace one cold night in April. Watched it curl and blacken. Sometimes on his early morning walks, cane in one hand, thermos of weak coffee in the other, William would pass by the middle school. The American flag flew there, limp in the wind. He always stopped to watch it, not because he still believed in the slogans, but because the flag reminded him of the ones who never got to come home. He'd mutter their names under his breath. Lopez, Ray, Collins, Tiny, the boy in the boat. People passed him on the sidewalk, earbuds and staring at screens, unaware that just a few feet away walked a man who still winced at fireworks, who still ducked instinctively at loud noises, and who still carried a story no one seemed to want. That winter, William hung a black ribbon from the edge of his porch. He didn't explain it, didn't tell the mailman or the neighbors what it meant, but he knew. It was for the boy whose name he didn't know, the one who took his seat. The world had gone quiet, but silence, William had learned, was not the absence of sound. It was the absence of being seen, of being remembered. And as he stood beneath that ribbon looking out at a world spinning too fast to care, William Harland whispered what he'd whispered every year since 1945, "I'm sorry." After decades of silence and being overlooked, William Harland remains burdened by a war memory that the world no longer wants to carry. But when one voice decides to listen, everything begins to shift. It began with a knock on the door. William wasn't expecting anyone that morning. It was a Tuesday in early spring, the kind where the snow has mostly melted, but the wind still bites through your coat. He shuffled to the front door in his slippers, tugging his cardigan tight across his chest. On the other side stood a young woman in a long wool coat, holding a manila envelope under one arm. "Mr. Harland," she asked, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. "My name's Ella Monroe. I'm a research fellow with the American Veterans Memory Project." William raised an eyebrow. "The what now?" She smiled nervously. "It's a non-profit. We digitize unrecorded combat experiences for the National Archives." "Someone shared your name. Said you served at the Rhine. Battle of the Bulge. Hill 360. William didn't answer at first. He just looked at her hard. Then quietly he said, "Come in. But I don't have much coffee left." For the next 2 hours they sat at his kitchen table. William talked more than he had in years. He told her about the cold, about the silence, about Lopez's eyes and the breath he felt leave Collins' lungs. He told her about the grenade he dropped into the dark, about the sniper's crack on the riverbank, and finally about the boy in the boat. "I gave him that seat," William said again, voice hoarse. "He was dead before he hit the floor. 15 seconds. That's all it took." Ella didn't type. She didn't record. She just listened. And when she left, she shook his hand with both of hers and said softly, "Mr. Harland, your story isn't forgotten anymore." He didn't believe her. Not at first. 3 weeks later, he received a letter in the mail. Official-looking, embossed seal from the Greenwood Historical Society. Inside was an invitation. "In recognition of your service and your witness, we would be honored to include your story in the Veterans Legacy exhibit. We hope you'll join us for a dedication ceremony at Greenwood Hall on May 15th. Below it was a handwritten note from Ella. They read it will. Every word. He held the letter for a long time. Then he set it down, walked into the garage, and stood beneath the jacket. His fingers brushed the fabric, the tear, the burn, and he whispered, "I'm bringing you with me." The day of the ceremony, Greenwood Hall was filled to the rafters. It wasn't grand, a modest auditorium with wood-paneled walls and rows of folding chairs, but it was packed. Young veterans in clean uniforms, elderly women with brooches shaped like flags, children holding hand-drawn signs. "Thank you, Mr. Harland. The boat seat matters. Tantunar, the empty seat." Someone had made a replica of the boat. 8 wooden seats. At the front, a single black painted chair draped in a folded flag. The inscription read, for the one who took the seat and the one who never forgot. William sat in the front row, dressed in his old uniform, the medals dull but still proud on his chest. He hadn't worn it in 50 years. It still fit. A military archivist took the podium. She spoke of William's journey, his decades of silence, and the letter he never sent. She didn't recite names, she recited emotions. Regret, sacrifice, remembrance. Then the mayor stepped forward. A man in his 50s, clean-cut, known more for business suits than battlefield talk. William recognized him. He'd once made a dismissive comment on TV about glorifying old wars. But now, with a solemn expression and notes trembling in his hands, the mayor turned to William. "I got it wrong," he said, voice thick. "I thought remembering meant romanticizing. I didn't understand that remembering is the only way to give these stories their dignity. Mr. Harland, we owe you more than thanks. We owe you presence." He stepped off the stage and saluted. The entire room followed. A teenage girl, maybe 16, walked up next. She wore a white dress and clutched a framed photo of a young soldier. "My family thinks this might have been the boy," she said softly. "The one in the boat. My great-uncle, James O'Leary, radio operator, transferred to Will's unit, February 45. Never came home." William looked at the photo. Blonde hair, sharp jaw, eyes steady and young. It could have been him. Might have been. He reached out with trembling fingers and touched the glass. "I think it was," he whispered. "I really do." The ceremony ended with a moment of silence, but not the heavy, suffocating kind that William had lived with. This one was different, filled with breath, with reverence, with shared understanding. The kind of silence that says we're still here, we're still listening. As the crowd began to rise and scatter, William stayed seated. Ella joined him, placing a hand gently on his arm. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "I never wanted medals, just wanted someone to remember that he mattered." "They do now," she said. "You both do." When he finally stood, William stepped toward the replica boat and placed something on the black seat, his jacket. The one with the hole, the one that had carried the silence. "I don't need to carry this anymore," he said aloud. People bowed their heads. Some wiped away tears. The mayor stepped forward and nodded. "It'll stay here. Always." William turned to leave, walking slowly, cane tapping the floor with each step. As he passed the exit, a young boy in a scout uniform tugged his sleeve. "Mister," the boy said, "are you the man from the boat?" William paused, then smiled, the first real smile in years. "No," he replied, "I'm the man who remembers him." After a lifetime of silence, William Harland's story is finally heard. A ceremony in his honor brings long overdue recognition, not just for him, but for the fallen boy whose seat he gave away. Now in his final chapter, William must decide what to leave behind. The jacket stayed in Greenwood Hall. Folded neatly across the black seat of the replica boat, it sat inside a clear protective case, now behind glass polished weekly by a quiet maintenance worker who'd once served in Iraq. The plaque beneath it read, "Donated by William Harland, survivor of the Rhine crossing Hill 360 and the Battle of the Bulge, in memory of the boy who took his seat." It had been 3 months since the ceremony, since the mayor's apology, since the teenage girl in the white dress handed him a photograph that brought shape to decades of haunting. William Harland had become a name in the new, a face on local television, a trending topic online. For 1 week, his story reached millions. But William didn't care about the numbers. What mattered were the letters. Stacks of them. Dozens at first, then hundreds. From veterans, from grandchildren, from strangers who'd never held a rifle but understood what it meant to carry grief. Some came with photos, others with poems. One boy from Kentucky had drawn a crayon sketch of the boat with William at the front and a halo over the boy behind him. It made William cry. He didn't expect what came next. Ella called in early June with news a local community college wanted to create a scholarship in William's name. Not for history or war studies, she said, but for engineering. William paused on the other end of the line. "Why that?" "Because that's what you signed up for, remember. The program that got canceled, you never got to be the engineer, Will. But someone else can." The words hit him like a second wind. He thought back to 1943, his young self clutching a recruiting pamphlet that promised a future filled with blueprints and bridge designs, not foxholes and frostbite. That dream had vanished when the Army shut down the ASP programs. One letter, one notice, one more detour in a life filled with them. But now maybe it would lead someone else forward. He gave his blessing. By September, the first recipient had been chosen. Her name was Maya Torres, 21 years old, first-generation college student. Her father had served in Afghanistan. Her brother was in the Navy. Maya wanted to build solar-powered water systems for drought-prone towns in New Mexico. I read about you, she told William, sitting across from him at the college's dedication ceremony. I saw the photo of the seat and the jacket. I didn't know history could feel that close. William smiled at her. It's always close. We just don't always notice the thread. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folder. Inside were sketches, designs for modular pump systems that could operate off-grid. William studied them, nodding slowly. You're going to build more than bridges, he said. You're going to build futures. He visited Greenwood Hall one last time that fall. The air had turned sharp crisp with the smell of burning leaves. Inside the museum, a docent recognized him immediately and offered a quiet escort to the memorial exhibit. The hall was still. The wooden boat still sat under soft amber lighting. The jacket, gently illuminated, looked almost alive, like it had absorbed the breath and sorrow of decades and was finally resting. Nearby children stood with headphones on, listening to the recorded version of William's story. A girl, maybe 9, turned to her mother and whispered, "That's the man who gave his seat away, right?" "No," her mother said gently. "He gave it to someone else. And then he remembered him so no one would forget." William stood a few feet away. His heart felt heavy and light all at once. He took a deep breath and walked up to the case. He didn't say much, just pressed his palm to the glass and whispered, "You're safe now." That winter, William returned home to Monroe and began sorting through his old belongings. The uniform, the medals, a box of letters he'd never mailed. One addressed to James O'Leary's family was now framed in his hallway. He started donating things, his books to the library, his tools to the vocational high school. Even his record player went to a young neighbor who'd helped shovel his driveway last storm. The boy was surprised. "Why me?" he'd asked. "Because you asked about the jacket," William said. No one ever asked. The boy nodded, serious in the way only a 12-year-old can be when given something sacred. In his final months, William began writing again. Not memoirs, just letters. Short, simple, addressed to no one. Sometimes he left them at bus stops. Other times he slipped them into library books or church pews. "You matter. Thank you for remembering." He was real. His name was James. And always at the bottom, W.H. He said it helped him sleep. The day William passed, it was snowing lightly. He died in his sleep, face turned gently toward the window. On the nightstand beside him was a photograph of the boat, the scholarship certificate with Maya's name, and a note in his handwriting. If someone must carry the memory, let it be out of love. His funeral was modest, no fanfare. But the mayor came. So did Maya Ella and the boy with the record player. Veterans from 3 generations stood shoulder to shoulder and saluted. A bugler played taps and the folded flag was presented to Maya, not because she was family, but because William had once told her, "I never got to build. But you will. That makes you mine." And so in the halls of Greenwood, in the minds of children, listening with wide eyes, in the hands of a young woman designing water systems for the dry parts of America, William Harland endures. Not because he charged a hill, not because he wore a uniform, but because he remembered what most people forget. He remembered the boy.